Every morning at exactly 7, she would see him, the old man with trembling hands and kind eyes, struggling to cross the same cracked street with a bag of bread and milk. And every morning, she'd rush forward before the light turned green, gently take his arm, and walk him across. She never knew his name at first. He'd just smile and say, "Thank you, child," before shuffling off toward a small house with faded blue paint and a rusty gate. What she didn't know was that helping him every day would soon pull her into a story that would test her heart, her faith, and everything she believed about kindness. It began as a routine, something comforting in her otherwise chaotic life. Aisha worked double shifts at the hospital, slept little, and lived in a tiny rented room above a noisy mechanic's shop. But every morning, helping that old man somehow made the day feel worth it. He reminded her of her late father, the same tired smile, the same way his hands shook as he held the bag close to his chest. Sometimes, she'd walk with him all the way home, making sure he got inside safely. The first time she did, she noticed how empty the place looked, just a few pictures on the wall and a dusty piano in the corner. Over time, they began to talk. His name was Mr. Raymond. He had been a schoolteacher once, and the piano, he said, belonged to his late wife. She used to play it every evening, he told her, looking at it with eyes full of memories. Now it just sits there, waiting for music. Aisha started visiting after her shifts, bringing him groceries or cooking simple meals when she could. He'd tell her stories of old Lahore, of students who'd once come to visit him, of how he missed the sound of laughter in his house. Sometimes he'd doze off mid-conversation, and she'd quietly cover him with a blanket and turn off the light. One evening, as she was leaving, he said softly, "You know, you've brought light into this home again. My own family doesn't visit anymore. But you treat me like I still matter." That sentence stayed with her. She didn't do it for praise, it just felt right. But there was something about the way he said it, something lonely beneath the gratitude, that made her eyes sting. Days turned into weeks. The old man's health began to worsen. He coughed more, ate less, and sometimes forgot where he'd put things. Aisha tried to get him to see a doctor, but he always waved it off. "I've seen enough hospitals, child. Just sit and talk to me instead." So she did. She'd sit beside him as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, listening to the piano's silent presence in the room, and she'd wonder what it would sound like if someone played it again. Then, one morning, everything changed. When she reached his house, the blue gate was wide open. 2 sleek black cars were parked outside. Men in suits stood at the door, talking in low, firm voices. And in the middle of them was a young man, tall, confident, impatient. Aisha hesitated at the gate. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm here to see Mr. Raymond." The young man turned, frowning slightly. "And you are?" "I'm Aisha. I help him sometimes." He looked her up and down, the hospital uniform, the tired face. "Right. Well, you don't need to anymore. My grandfather won't be living here much longer." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, she saw Mr. Raymond sitting on a chair near the porch, looking smaller than ever, confused and frightened. "They want to take me away," he said weakly when he saw her. The young man sighed. "We're moving him to a care facility, Mississippi. He can't stay alone here, it's not safe. Legal papers are being processed. Please don't interfere." But the way the old man clutched Aisha's hand told her something wasn't right. The lawyers spoke in legal terms she couldn't follow: property, inheritance, transfer of ownership. One of them mentioned selling the house. Another said something about finalizing before winter. Aisha's heart pounded that night. She couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the old man's eyes, pleading, helpless, trapped in a world he didn't understand. The next morning, she went back. But the house was locked. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the gate. She called hospitals, senior homes, nothing. No one by that name. It was as if he'd vanished. Days passed, and her morning walks felt empty. Every time she reached that street, she found herself looking for him, expecting to see that frail figure waiting for her help. Then, one rainy evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she saw the young man again, the grandson. He was standing outside in the parking lot, smoking, staring at nothing. Something inside her snapped. She walked straight up to him. "Where is he?" she demanded. "What did you do with your grandfather?" He froze, surprised. Then his shoulders dropped. "He's gone," he said quietly. "He passed away 2 nights ago." The rain blurred her vision, but it wasn't the rain that made her eyes sting. "You didn't even tell anyone," she said, voice trembling. He sighed, his tone bitter. "He didn't want me there. You know, every time I tried to visit, he'd tell me he didn't need my pity. I sent money, nurses, whatever he wanted, but he pushed me away. You think I didn't care? You think this is easy for me?" She stood there, silent, as he ran a hand through his wet hair. "He left a letter," he said after a pause. "For you." Aisha's breath caught. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper, edges damp from the rain. Her hand shook as she opened it. "My dear Aisha," it began in trembling handwriting, "thank you for walking with me, not just across the street, but through the last days of my life. You reminded me that kindness still exists, even when family forgets and time takes everything away. The piano, it's yours now. I hope you'll play it. Let music return to this house once more.
Raymond.
Tears rolled down her face. She looked up, but the grandson had already walked away, his figure fading into the rain. Weeks later, she used her savings to buy the house. It took months of paperwork, but eventually, she stood in that same dusty room, her hand resting on the piano's worn keys. When she pressed the first note, the sound filled the empty walls like a heartbeat returning. She smiled through her tears, whispering, "You were right, Mr. Raymond, the music was just waiting." Outside, the evening light poured through the window, soft and golden, touching the piano like a blessing, and that was how a nurse with nothing but compassion ended up giving an old man's house new life, one note, one memory, one act of kindness at a time, because sometimes, the smallest help we offer a stranger can echo long after they're gone, not in their words, but in the lives they quietly change forever.